Joining us now, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Democrat Chris Coons of Delaware. Yesterday, Senator Coons says he plans to introduce anti-discrimination legislation as a result of the Supreme Court's ruling on Trump's travel ban. So there's concerns internationally about terrorists being emboldened by this ban. What are your concerns about what could happen here in this country?
Well, Mika, I think I'm concerned that the president is going to use this to feed into his false narrative that Democrats aren't concerned about keeping our country safe and strengthening our borders. Along with many other Democrats, I co-sponsored a comprehensive immigration reform bill that would invest billions of dollars in border security, in strengthening our visa systems, and making sure we know who is coming and who's leaving. So I utterly reject the false narrative that Democrats don't care about border security, but we also care about American values, about not tearing families apart at the border as a tool in our ongoing immigration fight, and about not accepting a blanket ban on Muslims coming to this country. President Trump, as candidate Trump, said clearly and repeatedly he was calling for a complete and total ban on Muslims coming to this country. On his third try, he managed to get a travel ban that the Supreme Court, in a narrow 5-4 ruling, decided was constitutional. But just because the Supreme Court has ruled that it's constitutional doesn't mean that it fits with our core values. And I do think there's ways that we can strengthen the Immigration and Nationality Act to make sure that we are complying with our most important fundamental values of non-discrimination against people for their religion.
John Meacham.
Senator, if one of the Supreme Court justices announced their retirement in the next couple of weeks, would you entertain at all the question of whether, in fact, the Democrats in the Senate should support the confirmation of a replacement under President Trump?
Well, right now we'd have real difficulty preventing the confirmation of a replacement under the president under our current rules. The Republican majority would proceed with hearings on the Judiciary Committee and would likely proceed to a floor vote. As you know better than most folks, John, we've had hearing after hearing, week after week on the Judiciary Committee where the long respected rules that have prevented the minority from being run over in terms of who's confirmed for circuit court judges have been changed. And we're not following the blue slip the way we did for most of the last century. We're not following long established traditions. So if that happens, I think we're going to have a battle royal in the Senate about it. But at this point, it'd be quite difficult for Democrats to actually block a nominee unless there were Republicans who oppose that nominee as well.
Mike.
Senator, you're on that train to Wilmington quite often, going back to America, going back to the normal part of America, apart from Washington, D.C. We have a president who seems intent on fueling nearly every day and every issue with a campaign element called fear. Nearly everything he says or does, he injects a little fear into it, fear of the other, fear of immigration. Fear of past failures haunting us, that he's the guy who has to turn everything around. So let me ask you, when you think about what the president says and when you think about the environment that you live in, not the Senate, but Wilmington, Delaware, do you at all fear that the president is heading down a path toward running for re-election of a white America?
Well, you know, what the president successfully tapped into in his 2016 campaign was millions of Americans who felt they were on the outside, felt they weren't respected, felt that their future for them and their kids wasn't getting brighter. And he made a lot of promises. And one of the things that's concerning me is he's keeping his bad promises and he's breaking his good promises. So he promised we'd all get better health care at lower cost. And the opposite is happening. They tried and failed to repeal the Affordable Care Act. So the president is now tearing it down a piece at a time, now going after pre-existing condition protections. He promised he'd make America safer, but he's focusing on dividing us from our allies with this tariff fight with Canada, with Germany. You've got Harley-Davidson threatening to begin manufacturing more of its motorcycles overseas. So he is injecting fear, as you say, Mike. That's the way he's going about campaigning as he governs. And my concern is that we need a message in my party that is optimistic and that talks about how we can all do better when we are a more welcoming, optimistic, and positive society. Sometimes it's hard to beat fear and anger and division with civility and progress and optimism. But I think that's the message that will ultimately succeed, and that's why I keep legislating and working hard across the aisle. Two different bills I've worked on a long time, one with Bob Corker, one with Marco Rubio. Just got out of committee yesterday on two different committees to help Americans save for college and to help us grow export markets around the world and fight poverty in the developing world. I think it's important for us to show that if we get control of the House or the Senate, that we can do things to not just keep America safe, but to bring us together and make us stronger.
Senator Coons, it's Willie Geist. It's good to see you this morning. You've been outspoken over the last couple of weeks about the separation of families along the southern border. And yesterday, in front of the Senate Finance Committee, you had the Health and Human Services Secretary, Alex Azar, in his sworn testimony saying the following, quote, "There is no reason why any parent would not know where their child is located."
Right.
At keystrokes, I sat on the ORR portal with just basic keystrokes. Within seconds, I could find any child in our care for any parent. Is it true that it's that easy for parents and children to be reunited along the border? And if so, why isn't it happening faster?
That's a great question, and I appreciate your raising it, because we need to hold this administration accountable. First, this was a humanitarian crisis of President Trump's creation. There was no urgent, pressing need for them to begin a zero-tolerance policy that forcibly separated parents and children, sometimes by 1,000 or 2,000 miles, except as a tool to prevent others from coming to this country seeking refuge and to get the advantages they were looking for in advancing their conservative agenda on immigration, like building the wall. It may be that easy. I don't know. Secretary Azar testified under oath that it's that easy, but it isn't happening. Right. Despite the president signing an executive order, Secretary Azar testified yesterday that there's still 2,000 children separated from their parents.
So what's taking so long, Senator? People watching this from the outside don't get it. If the problem's been identified, the administration says it is working quickly to make these reunifications happen. Why aren't they happening?
These children have been separated all over the country, and frankly, I don't know yet whether it's a lack of will or a lack of resources or a lack of time, but we need to hold the administration accountable for the fact they've created this crisis. They've promised they'll resolve it, and they are not making the progress yet that they should in reuniting parents and children and in stopping this policy, reversing this policy. As his testimony revealed yesterday, it's unclear what will happen to those families that were separated weeks or months ago, and it's unclear whether they might at some point renew this practice of separating parents and children.
So, Senator Coons, before you go, I would love to hear what you think is happening inside the Democratic Party. I'm pointing to this incredible upset victory by this young woman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Outspent 18-1, defeating Joe Crowley in New York's 14th congressional district. People woke up to a new leader this morning in the New York City area, a young Latina, half Puerto Rican. What is this saying about what's happening inside the Democratic Party?
Well, first, it's a reminder to everyone who's elected to pay attention to your home district. And as you well remember, Mika, I got elected in 2010 in no small part because a well-respected, long-established statewide Republican Party leader lost in an upset primary where a very small percentage of people voted. 30,000 people voted in that primary last night. She's a very compelling speaker. She's got a bright future. I know Joe Crowley. He's been a huge figure in New York politics for a long time now. And this does create a challenge in terms of future leadership in the House and the Democratic caucus. But I think this is also an opportunity. It's a reminder of how much energy there is out there, how many folks want to come out and get engaged and participate. We've got a lot of new, young, first-time candidates, and I welcome that. I think that's the kind of energy our party needs to take the majority back in the House.
All right, Senator Chris Coons, thank you very much. And still ahead, we're going to speak to the candidate herself. 7 months ago, she was bartending and waiting tables. Now, less